Look at your surname. If it ends in -ez, Martínez, González, Hernández, Rodriguez, you are carrying a medieval Castilian father's name. If it begins with Alcázar, Almodóvar, you are carrying a word in Arabic, left behind by 781 years of Moorish Spain. If it reads de la Cruz, del Rio, de la Fuente, you are carrying a landscape from the age of the Reconquista. There are 62 million Hispanic Americans today. But Spanish surnames in America reach far beyond that number, into Filipino communities whose names were assigned by colonial decree, into Sephardic Jewish families who carried Spain's surnames into exile in 1492, into Old Texas and California families who were Spanish colonists before the United States existed. This film goes surname by surname, so you can find your own. The most important thing to understand about Spanish surnames is the -ez suffix, the equivalent of the Polish Witz or the Scottish Mac. In medieval Castilian Spanish, -ez meant son of. Fernández is son of Fernando. Martínez is son of Martín. González is son of Gonzalo. López is son of Lope. Rodriguez is son of Rodrigo. Hernández is son of Hernando, an older form of Fernando. These are not generic last names. Each one is a patronymic chain, freezing a father's name from the medieval period into a surname that has now been carried across 500 years and an ocean. The Martínez who lives in Houston today carries the name of a medieval Castilian man named Martín. The González in Miami carries the name of a man named Gonzalo. These patronymics began hardening into fixed hereditary surnames around the 12th to 14th centuries in Castile, León, and Aragon, not earlier, not randomly, but during the Reconquista. The Spanish Christian kingdoms needed to track their populations for military service, land grants, and church records, and these surnames became permanent. The surnames they produced are among the most common in the entire Americas today. García is the most common Spanish surname in the world, carried by over 10 million people, and the most common Hispanic surname in the United States. Its origin is likely Basque, possibly from an old word for young or descendant, but unlike most major Spanish surnames, it is not a patronymic. It was a personal name that became a family name, traced back to the Navarrese king García Sánchez in the 10th century and spread southward through the Reconquista. López means son of Lope, and Lope comes from the Latin lupus, wolf. The López de Haro family were lords of Vizcaya in the Basque country, one of medieval Spain's most powerful noble lineages, so every López in America carries the wolf through a chain of Castilian fathers. Martínez means son of Martín, named after Saint Martin of Tours, the Roman soldier who became one of Europe's most popular saints. In medieval Castile, the name was so common that Martínez became one of the most frequent surnames. González means son of Gonzalo, and Gonzalo comes from the Visigothic name Gundisalvus, meaning battle and spirit, a direct link to the Germanic rulers who controlled Spain for 3 centuries after Rome fell. Hernández, son of Hernando, traces back to the Visigothic Fredinandus, peace and bold. Hernán Cortés bore that given name when he conquered the Aztec Empire. Rodriguez means son of Rodrigo, from the Visigothic Roderick, fame and power. Rodrigo was the last Visigothic king, defeated at the Battle of Guadalete in 711, when the Moorish invasion began, an event that shaped Spain for 8 centuries and the surnames Spain carried into the New World. That defeat at Guadalete in 711 opened a door that would stay open for 781 years. From that year until 1492, the Moors, Muslims of North African and Arab descent, ruled much of the Iberian Peninsula, and when the Christian kingdoms finally pushed them out, They did not erase them. They absorbed them. The proof is still written in Spanish surnames. Take Alcázar. It comes from the Arabic Alcázar, the castle, the fortress, a word that described the great stone strongholds of Moorish Spain, became a surname carried by families for generations. Guadalupe. It sounds deeply Spanish, but behind it is Wadi al-Lub, Arabic for River of the Wolf, a place in Extremadura, named by Arabs, that became one of the most sacred Catholic names in the world, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Almodovar, from Al-Mudawar, the rounded city, reaching back to a town on the Guadalquivir, and from there into the colonial world. That al prefix is a geographic confession. In Arabic, al means the. Alcalá, Alcántara, Almodovar, the Moorish layer is locked into each of them, even when the families who carried them were Christian. And consider Alvarez. Its root is Alvaro, a Visigothic name meaning cautious. But it survived through the Mozarabs, Christians living under Moorish rule in Al-Andalus, who preserved their Germanic names inside an Arabic-speaking world. A 5-century-old name, a Germanic root, an Arabic context, a Castilian seal. That is the whole history of Spain in one surname. Before the Moors, before the Romans, the Visigoths ruled Iberia for 3 centuries. Their Germanic personal names, Hernández, Hrodric, Gundisalvus, did not vanish with their kingdom. They were absorbed into medieval Castilian speech and hardened into surnames. Fernando derives from Frithu, peace, and Nanth, bold. His son became Fernández. Rodrigo, from Harad, fame, and Ric, power, was the name of the last Visigothic king, defeated at Guadalete in 711. His descendants became Rodriguez. Gonzalo, from Gundisalvus, battle and spirit, became González. Alvaro, from the Visigothic Alaric meaning all-ruler, became Alvarez. Ramiro, from Radomir, council famous, became Ramirez. Gutier, from the Gothic Walthari, army ruler, became Gutierrez. Jimeno, likely of Basque origin but adopted by Visigothic nobility, became Jimenez. These were not idle names. They marked lineages that fought through the Reconquista, received land grants in newly conquered territories, and then crossed the Atlantic. When a Gutierrez family settled in New Mexico in 1598, the Germanic root of their surname was already 1,000 years old. Today, millions of Americans carry the same Visigothic inheritance in Martínez, Hernández, González, each name a thread from a 5th-century warrior's tongue, woven through medieval Castile, the Reconquista, and the colonial Americas. The Basque language, Euskara, is one of Europe's deepest mysteries, related to no known language. It was spoken in northern Iberia before the Romans, before the Celts, before any written record. And when the Spanish Empire expanded, the names born from this ancient tongue spread with it. Aguirre comes from Aguirre, the Basque word for an open field or prominent place, a name carried by Lope de Aguirre, the conquistador who led a bloody rebellion along the Amazon in 1561. Echeverria, or Echeverria, means new house, eche for house, berri for new. Iriarte splits iri, town, and arte, between, a man from between towns. Urdaneta, seemingly humble, comes from urda, pigsty, and neta, small, little pigsty. Yet Andrés de Urdaneta, the Basque friar who bore that name, made one of the greatest navigational discoveries in history. In 1565, he found the eastward route across the Pacific from the Philippines to Mexico, opening the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade that would connect Asia and the Americas for 250 years. Basques were everywhere in the Spanish colonial world: sailors, soldiers, governors, merchants. Their surnames, structured by landscape and language, arrived in California missions, Texas ranchos, Philippine provinces. Every Aguirre in Los Angeles, every Echeverria in El Paso, every Urdaneta in Manila carries a name from a language so old it was old before Rome conquered Spain. In the Basque country, those mountains still stand. In America, the names still echo. But there is another layer beneath the surface, a hidden history written in surnames that once belonged to Jews. In 1492, the same year Columbus sailed, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella signed the Alhambra Decree, expelling all Jews from Spain. An estimated 150,000 to 200,000 Jews were forced to leave. Those who remained converted to Christianity, becoming conversos, or new Christians. Many secretly kept their Jewish faith while adopting new surnames, often from the towns they had fled. Toledano, from Toledo, the great medieval center of Jewish scholarship. The Jewish quarter of Toledo produced poets, astronomers, and translators. When its families converted, they took the city's name as their own. Navarro, from the Kingdom of Navarre, where Jewish communities had thrived for centuries. Espinoza, from Espino, the thorn bush, a common nature surname chosen by converso families. Castro, from the Latin for fort, a name found across Sephardic genealogical records. De Leon, from the Kingdom of Leon, whose Jewish families carried this territorial name into exile. These surnames did not stay in Spain. The Sephardic diaspora carried them to the Netherlands, the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and eventually to the Americas. In Newport, Savannah, Charleston, and New Orleans, Sephardic communities built synagogues and cemeteries with stones bearing names like Turo, Cardozo, and Lopez. Justice Benjamin Cardozo, a Supreme Court justice, bore a Sephardic surname, a direct line to the Jewish families of 15th century Portugal. Today, millions of Americans carry these names without knowing that each one is a fragment of a 500-year-old exile. Beyond the Atlantic, Spain's surname system reached the edge of Asia. When the United States took the Philippines in 1898, it inherited a nation of 7,000 islands where nearly every family carried a Spanish surname, not by blood, not by choice, but by the stroke of a colonial governor's pen. In 1849, Narciso Claveria, the Spanish governor of the Philippines, issued the Catalogo Alfabético de Apellidos, an alphabetical catalog of approved surnames, and ordered every Filipino family to register one. Before that decree, most Filipinos used a single indigenous name. After it, entire provinces received their surnames in alphabetical blocks. One district took all the A names, the next the B's, the next the C's. That is why the Philippines is the only country in Asia where a farmer in a remote rice terrace and a banker in Manila may both carry Santos, Reyes, Cruz, or Garcia, names assigned by district, typed in a colonial office, and endured now for 5 generations. The Filipino Americans who carry those names today, more than 3.5 million in the United States, carry a colonial document, not a family tree. The surname records no ancestor and no bloodline. It records the moment a Spanish bureaucracy imposed order onto a colony. Yet across the Pacific, that imposition became identity. A Cruz in California may have no Spanish ancestor at all, but the name is fully, unmistakably Filipino. It is a memory of empire that a people made their own. Long before the United States stretched to the Pacific, Spanish surnames were already rooted in the soil of Texas, New Mexico, California, and Florida. The Californios, families like the Lugos, the Sepulvedas, the Picos, the Vallejos, held land grants from the Spanish crown in the 1700s, ranchos that covered entire valleys. When Mexico became independent in 1821, these families became Mexican citizens. When the United States annexed Texas in 1845 and seized the Southwest in 1848, they became Americans, without moving an inch. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised to protect their property and rights. In practice, many lost their lands through legal challenges, property taxes, and outright fraud. The Sepulveda family of California once owned a rancho stretching from present-day Los Angeles to the ocean, roughly 75,000 acres. Within 2 generations, most of it was gone. In New Mexico, families named Benavides, Chavez, and Vigil had lived in settlements like Santa Fe since the early 1600s, older than Plymouth Colony. They watched their Spanish language and customs pushed aside by Anglo settlers. In Florida, families descended from 16th-century Spanish St. Augustine, the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the continental United States, saw their names anglicized or forgotten. These were not immigrants. They were the original Spanish-speaking Americans, carrying surnames that had been in their families for 2 centuries before the American flag arrived. Those old colonial families often carried surnames built from a single Spanish preposition, de, meaning of. The construction is ancient and territorial. A man takes his name from the place he came from. If he lived by the cross that marked a church or crossroads, he became de la Cruz. If his village stood by a river, del Rio, by a fountain, de la Fuente, by the mountain range, de la Sierra. These are not descriptions. They are geographic signatures, formally recorded in parish registers and royal land grants from Castile to New Spain. The name de la Cruz is the most common compound Spanish surname across the entire Americas, appearing in Mexico, the Caribbean, the Philippines, and the United States in enormous numbers. It carries the Christianity of the Reconquista forward across 5 centuries. The cross has a fixed point in the landscape and a fixed mark on a family's identity. When you meet a Del Rio in Texas or a De La Fuente in California, you are meeting a name that records not just a geography, but a moment in time, when the Spanish world assigned its people by the land they walked, and the land kept the name. But if the surname is the door, the name entered on a royal census or a colonial mission register, then DNA is the room behind it. Y chromosome studies of Spanish surname bearers in the Americas have found 3 consistent ancestral signals. The dominant male lineage is R1b M269, the West European haplogroup that traces back to pre-Roman Celtic and Iberian populations, the same tribes the Romans and Visigoths encountered. A man named González, or Hernández, whose Y DNA is R1b, carries a genetic line that was old before the Reconquista began. The second recurring signal is E1b1b, the haplogroup linked to North Africa and the Moorish presence in Spain. Among Spanish surname populations, E1b1b appears at elevated rates compared to Northern Europeans, a direct, silent record of the 781 years of Islamic rule in Iberia. The third signal is J haplogroup, associated with the Middle East and with Sephardic Jewish ancestry, found disproportionately among families with surnames like Toledano, Espinosa, or Castro, the names the conversos carried out of Spain after 1492. The surname alone cannot tell you which of these layers you carry, but the DNA can. The name is the invitation. The genetic test reads the hidden chapters written in bone: the Visigothic warrior, the Moorish farmer, the Sephardic merchant, the Celtiberian shepherd, all present in the same paternal line, and all still speaking through a name you answer to today. But the surname is not a complete confession. It has limits. An easy ending tells you that a medieval Castilian father once bore the root name, but it cannot tell you when that father lived, or precisely where, or whether the line runs through adoption. illegitimacy, or non-paternity. The Martínez in Miami may have a direct biological chain to a man named Martín in 13th century Castile, or the surname may have entered his family through a stepfather, a godparent, or a colonial record-keeper's error. The al prefix carries a Moorish echo, but not Moorish blood. Alcalá, Alcázar, Almodóvar, all born from Arabic place names, yet the families who took those names may have been Christian for centuries before doing so. The name records geography, not ancestry. Filipino Americans bearing Garcia, Santos, or Cruz carry names imposed by colonial decree in 1849, a bureaucrat's alphabetical assignment that may have no connection to their actual family history before that year. A Filipino father named Reyes is carrying a Spanish surname, but the name was chosen for his ancestor from a catalog. And Sephardic surnames like Toledano, Espinosa, or Cardozo, they whisper of Jewish ancestry, but they do not prove it. Confirmation requires genealogical records from Amsterdam, Istanbul, or the Ottoman archives. The surname is a clue, not a verdict. It points toward a story but does not guarantee it. Still, even with these limits, the name remains. It is a 500-year-old document, written in the language of the Reconquista, buried in the colonial archives of two empires, and spoken aloud every time someone calls your name. No European empire embedded its naming system so deeply across so many peoples and continents. From the Reconquista's conclusion in 1492, Spain spent 3 centuries projecting its language and laws, planting surnames from the adobe missions of California to the islands of the Philippines. Today, an estimated 62 million Hispanic Americans carry these names, joined by millions of Filipino Americans with surnames assigned by colonial decree, Sephardic Jewish descendants worldwide, and old colonial families in Texas and New Mexico. Each surname is a living remnant. González carries a Visigothic battle spirit. Almodóvar holds a Moorish geographical term, and Toledano whispers of Sephardic exile from medieval Toledo. Yet, honesty requires acknowledging their limits. These names are historical signals, not precise genealogical maps. A surname like Cruz may denote a Christian crossroads, but it cannot confirm your specific ancestral line. Filipino surnames like Santos were often alphabetically assigned, not inherited from Spanish ancestors. DNA testing might reveal Moorish or Jewish haplogroups hidden behind a common patronymic. Still, the scale astonishes. In New Mexico, some families document unbroken residence since the 1590s, before the Mayflower landed. In California, mission baptismal records list Spanish surnames from the 1700s. Your Spanish surname, whether inherited or imposed, is a 5-century-old document, written in the language of medieval kingdoms, stamped by colonial archives, and spoken now in American towns. It is the echo of a civilization that bridged the Atlantic and Pacific, a living fragment of history whispered each time it is called.